who is due to join us has been delayed in another meeting, but will be joining us as quickly as he can. So I'm going to pick up his slides if that's okay. And here we go. So this is really about, our local area SEND inspection, although actually we need to be very clear that it wasn't an inspection, and this is our inspectors actually were at great pains to reassure us that this wasn't an inspection. It was actually a visit. But I think, as you'll see when we go through the slides, that actually our preparation was such that we were treating this as an inspection, and I think this stood us in good stead. So if we go to the next slide, please, Gerri.
Okay, so the Dorset, Louise, are you able to see those slides? I'm not sure if we both got them on at the same time. Can I just check with you?
Yes, thank
you. You have,
yeah,
brilliant.
No, that's absolutely fine.
That's great. All right, so do you want to go ahead, Louise? Well, we haven't got it here. Okay.
Thank you. So from autumn 2020, Ofsted and CQC were conducting a number of visits to local areas regarding their SEND inspections. And the aims of these visits were really to support the local area to understand the impact of the pandemic on children and young people with SEND and their families. Find out what had worked well during this time, and also what the challenges had been and what those lessons were that had been learnt, and really using this information to inform a national picture of children, young people's and families' experiences during this COVID period. And they wanted to work with the local authority to identify opportunities for improvement that really address those challenges that were faced by children and young people with SEND, and also highlight best practice case studies and share those insights, as I said, nationally. Thank you, Gerri. Next slide. And this is over to you, Gerri.
Yeah, the Dorset local area was one of the first to go through a local area SEND inspection back in the beginning of 2017. So we were subject to a written statement of action, and we received a follow-up interim visit in 2019, at the beginning of that year. So in other words, we were very familiar with the experience of SEND inspection and the framework. So although this visit was described as a supportive visit rather than an inspection in the true sense of the word, it followed the same framework in a shortened form. So as Louise just mentioned, we treated it like an inspection visit. And I'm really glad we did, and we'll tell you more about that later. In terms of the format, there were 3 inspectors representing education, health and social care, spending 2 days on site, but with some remote meetings as well. The visit also included a sample of 4 to 6 case studies of children and young people with SEND, and also, of course, engagement with the families concerned and meetings with the practitioners who had been working with those families. So we also knew there were going to be 2 surveys, one survey to our parent carers and another to children and young people with SEND. And we were also told we would receive a summary note after the visit regarding the outcome that would be shared and agreed with the DFE and NHS England. And this wasn't to be published in the same way that a SEND local area inspection report or letter would be published, but the information gained would be used then to be part of a national report. In terms of the themes of the inspection, during the visit, the inspectors focused on 3 key outcomes that you can see here, 3 key themes about our response to the pandemic. And you can see here the first being our co-production with families, the second our collaborative work with partners across the local area, and then the third focusing on access to the right support at the right time. And although these weren't key lines of inquiry in the same way as with a larger local area inspection, the key themes were central to the line of questioning and the interaction that we had as leaders, the interaction with practitioners, with the families, as we went through the 2 days. So these themes fed through everything that we experienced in the lead up to the visit and during those 2 days. In terms of research questions, I'm just checking we haven't got Vic joined us yet, Louise. I'm assuming he's not with us yet. I'll carry on.
Gerri.
So the focus was on the experience. It was how had the child, the young person, experienced the pandemic? How had the family experienced the pandemic alongside that young person? What had worked well in terms of supporting them, especially innovative aspects to our work. An example would be that we had a very significant event called the Summer in Dorset, which happened during the summer break. And that was an example of how we created something very innovative. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Also, what the challenges had been, what hadn't worked well, what were the emerging issues. And of course, they were asking our families that as much as us, what didn't work so well. And also a recognition that this was a continuing situation. You know, this wasn't a pandemic that had finished, that we were continuing to plan and to review. So it was really important that we were able to answer those questions about, OK, what next? What are you planning next? Because we didn't know, there was a great deal of uncertainty, and of course still is. Louise?
Yes, OK, so our preparation. And I think, you know, we paid a lot of attention to the preparation that we did prior to the, our visitors arriving. So, you know, key things that we established very quickly were around our local area leadership planning group. And this included our executive director and also those key leaders from CQC and health provider services, and also our education leaders as well. And we had a lot of engagement quite quickly, which really set us off on really good footing. And also, I think really significant was around the engagement that we had with our Parent Carer Forum, particularly was beneficial in promoting the survey. So co-producing our response and our communication plan. And so that's something that we also established quite quickly, or drew up quite quickly, was knowing that we had a very short space of time, although as I'm sure many of you will agree that once when you have visitors, it feels like it won't end. But actually it does come to an end, and actually the time just goes so quickly, and there is lots to do in that time. And so the more collaboration and engagement that one can have with parent carer forums to get messages out to our parents and carers, and also to really stimulate that engagement, then the better that is. What we also did was we decided very early on that we wanted to complete a self-evaluation, so that although this wasn't a document that was requested by Ofsted, it was something that we thought would actually frame ourselves really well and would provide them with quite a lot of detail about what we've been doing in a range of different places. We also did a publication of our latest demographic and performance data, and established a project team which we had daily touchdowns with, and within that team we were all very clear about what role we were playing. So, for example, Gerri was leading a really talented team around quality assurance. We also had our SEND managers in this team, and our principal education psychologist as well. And between us, we were able to kind of really do the groundwork on the preparation. And also then, having written the self-evaluation framework, that really set us up quite well to produce that day one presentation that again wasn't necessarily asked for, but we just wanted to kind of provide a framework around something that didn't really have an established framework in terms of the visiting format. The other issue was around gaining written consent from all participants. So this was our families, practitioners, and our education settings. And this came after we had produced the list of 40 children, and then colleagues from Ofsted notified us of what we first thought was either going to be 4 or 6, but then in actual fact what turned out to be 6 cases plus 4 as backup. And so we were approaching parents, carers, practitioners, etc. for that consent. And given the time frame, so we had about a week in which to do that. And very quickly, didn't we, Gerri? We very quickly learned that actually using digital techniques was actually a most effective way to do that, rather than posting out consents, expecting people to then read everything that was contained therein and return those to us. And I think that was one of our principles, as much as possible, do with and alongside rather than to. And I think that reaped huge benefits throughout the visit. Next slide, please, Gerri. So as I said, initially we identified 20 children who were being supported by an education, health and care plan. And those children were nominated by from within our SEND team. And then also a further 20 children and young people who are supported by SEN support. And those children were nominated by our schools. And what we actually did, it was that we overproduced. So whilst the requirement was for 40 children, we were actually collating probably another 20 children on top of that, just so that, if there were any that didn't really kind of support us in any particular issues that we were wanting to address, then we had sort of an extensive number of children from which to put forward to our Ofsted. Then we submitted the list of children and young people because they were quite clear that they wanted a broad range of demographics and details that of services that were being used to support those young people, and also wanted to have a broad range of children who were receiving services in early help, child protection, as children in need or in children in care and specialist education services and NHS provision. And that's why we were asking for above and beyond the requirement in terms of the number of children, just so that we could provide that broad range of demographics from which they were going to choose the list of 6 children, as it turned out, the 6 plus 4. And we received those the names of those children back from, the identifiers of those children back from Ofsted on the Friday, late that Friday evening. And then what we did was provided quite a detailed case summary for each of those children, and in particular had a real focus on their experience of the pandemic. And I think what was really helpful, so up until this point in time, the focus was really about children with SEND or with supported by an education, health and care plan. But then what we did was that we held group meetings which included all of those practitioners involved with our children. And to discuss, working through the pandemic, the successes, the challenges, and the future working. And all of a sudden, what was created was, that real opportunity to look at the child absolutely in the round, and really talk about that child and that child's experience. And I think that was one of the significant things that made a real difference in being able to support colleagues in having those conversations with our Ofsted colleagues or CQC, but also being able to really understand the information that was held by other colleagues in the room that formed that whole picture of the child. Next slide. Gerri,
Okay.
back to you. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, it was important to us that that we agreed together prior to the visit what we considered to be an outstanding response. And Dorset had recently moved into a locality model of service delivery as recently as September, although of course we'd been planning a long time up until that point. But our premise in terms of doing that was that we were bringing together those important networks that are in a child's life, in terms of their school, those partner agencies working with that young person, with that family, all working together and to drive towards those outstanding outcomes. And it was really important to us that we were able to demonstrate the improved collaborative work that was going on in Dorset, and that we were able to demonstrate that during this visit. And in terms of co-produced solutions, throughout the pandemic, we have been listening to the experiences of children and young people and their families through our forums, our regular forums, informal work, but also more formal interaction. And we also knew that we had a really strong relationship with our Dorset Parent Carer Council, our forum, and we worked closely with them and had been all the way through listening and responding to the emerging issues. So our co-produced activity had become more embedded during COVID, and our communications had become more established just by default, by the nature of what was going on. So we wanted to make sure during the visit that we could share how we'd managed that and the impacts that it had. Oh, I can hear a dog barking. That's not mine. We also, in terms of outcome, us being outcome focused, we recognised that we needed to demonstrate the impact of the actions that we had taken to improve each child's outcome. So in other words, how we'd made life better for them. I'm going to ask whether Vic has joined us yet. If he hasn't, I'll move on to the next slide. So in terms of the 2 days, the inspectors were with us for those 2 days, although, as I said earlier, there was some virtual communication as well and meetings, and they provided the timetable for those 2 days and set up the calls prior to the visit that confirmed all of that detail. And they met first with the leaders of the local area, and that included our leaders across education, health, social care, and also, more importantly, our Parent Carer Forum representation. And that moved quickly through to engagement regarding the case studies that Louise described earlier. So firstly, met confidentially with the parent of the child, and then very quickly to the professionals who supported them, either the same day or the next morning. But they also looked at case study packs that we'd submitted in advance, and also started to analyse the surveys that had been sent out. And then in day 2, similar cycle, but the final feedback session, of course, was at the end of that session. Yes, Louise.
Sorry, before you go on to day 2, I think it's just probably worth noting that actually doing this in a virtual way was very different, because ordinarily, when we have visitors, when we have guests, we welcome them on site and arrange all of those meetings, etc., book rooms and manage people coming in and people going out. And I think I just think it's worth just mentioning that actually there was some things that we have learned from having to do this in a virtual way. So the room that we had as part of our setup meeting was quite a large meeting, so that we could ensure that we were acting within COVID regulations. So only having a number, 6 people in that room, and also ensuring that there was, sufficient social distance between each of the people present in the room. But then also we had a number of colleagues who were joining that call in a virtual way, and being in a big room brought its challenges. And I think it's always the devil's in the detail, isn't it? Because not having the right microphone or being able to be really interactive with those people who are also on the call presented some challenges in ensuring that those who weren't actually in the room felt part of that meeting. And I think, that's one of our learnings going forward, is that, having an established sort of Teams room, ensuring that, that the presentation is viewable by those who are in a virtual space as well as those who are actually in the physical space, and ensuring that, if there are questions being answered, how those are, or being asked, how those are facilitated by those who are in the virtual space and those who are in the real space. I think, we've learned quite a bit from that, and now have established Teams rooms. But I think, if that was something that I would want to do better going forward, then that would be the thing, because just making sure that those colleagues who were actually dialed in felt part of, and part of that setup presentation. It was quite challenging.
That moves us beautifully on to our reflections. So, as I said earlier, we've been through a larger local area inspection, and that experience really helped us in terms of informing our preparation and approach. But having said that, these additional reflections came to us following the visit. It's been really helpful talking as colleagues about what we've learned through this current visit experience. So, for example, our Parent Carer Forum sat with us on the leadership planning meetings right from the start, and that really helped ensure that partnership approach. And it also just emphasised to the inspection team that our co-production had been strengthened during the pandemic. And do butt in here, Louise, if you want to. I mean, similarly, we planned and prepared for the visit with our schools and our settings. That was really crucial, and because after all, they've been the closest to these young people during this time in terms of support. So it was really, really important to us that they were part of that engagement. And as I said earlier, although this was an interim visit, it had been pitched to us as being a supportive visit. We treated it like an inspection visit, and that really helped us in terms of reflecting on our practice and on our service delivery. And Louise has just really beautifully described how we used virtual to our advantage. We know that virtual communications has its pluses and it has its pitfalls, of course, but we knew we could use that positive, that more direct and that immediate liaison and exchange of information, and we used it to our advantage, and it was really helpful. I found, I don't know how you felt, Louise, I found the whole thing was very efficient in terms of using it.
Yeah, it was, and I think as part of the setup presentation, because again, our visitors weren't going out to settings. And so we felt that it was really important that we brought children's voices into that setup presentation.
Yes.
And so we did that by requesting videos, any kind of footage that schools had, and were absolutely inundated. Videos that, well, probably not videos, film of young people's experiences throughout COVID. With the activities that different schools had been doing, how schools had been engaging with young people, visiting young people, and so we had that as part of our setup presentation, and also we filmed some facilitated conversations between our corporate director for education and some of our school heads, and wanted to bring that into the presentation as well. So, ordinarily, or quite often, those setup presentations are very much a sort of PowerPoint, but we really strengthened ours by having those videos as well. And also, we had a film of our executive director talking to members of our Dorset Parent Carer Council as well. And again, included that as that setup presentation. So rather than wanting to be limited by the fact that colleagues weren't going out to different settings, weren't going to be meeting with a range of people, we actively brought those voices into our setup presentation.
And I mean, that next bullet point around keeping a small focused team. I mean, Louise, I found, it was really helpful just not having too many people around the table. And, we had our DCO there, we had our, clinical lead there, and our leaders, representation from our leadership team. But also, as Louise mentioned earlier, some of our practitioners that were delivering on the front line. But we kept it small and we kept it focused. And I think that was beneficial, I think, for all of us, not to make it too wide a group that were working on this, because it allowed the business as usual stuff. After all, we were going through that pandemic, and we needed to ensure that we could carry on with our service delivery. So it just allowed the local area to maintain the response.
Yeah.
And I think, in terms of that final bullet point there, we knew it was important to be transparent about our weaknesses, what we'd learnt, what we still needed to do. We presented our a description of our self-evaluation. We knew there was still much to do, but we wanted to make sure that we could showcase the improvements that we'd made since that written statement of action was written 3 years ago, and what we'd achieved also despite the pandemic happening. I mean, I think also, Louise, I know we work very closely together in terms of the auditing, and I found that a real learning opportunity myself, because it was very child-centred, really focused child-centred work, and it really helped us reflect on the improvements that we could make to our quality assurance processes, which we already have in place, our case auditing. But by doing that really focused, detailed case study analysis together, I think it then helped us reflect on the other quality assurance processes we already had in place.
No, I agree, Gerri, absolutely. And also being able to do that in the round where we were challenging each other, because I think, at the start of this, I can remember having, conversations with Vic about, my background, I'm a social worker, Vic, very much education, and also, other colleagues, so yourself and our principal educational psychologist, sort of saying, well, actually, with the focus is around, special educational needs, etc., and sort of, having that challenge about, okay, but actually this young person is also being supported by a child protection plan. So how do we? And I think the process and the approach that we took really evidenced that we had really broken down some of that silo working, and were able to talk about children from a whole range of different perspectives. And I think that was a really strong approach that strengthened the quality assurance process, as you talked about, Gerri, but also provided us with the opportunity to really evidence that we know our children, and we know our children even more. So I think, it was really positive experience.
Thank you. So that's the end of the presentation. We have our contact details there. Please do get in touch, either just to discuss what we've talked about today, or if you'd like some help, support, guidance around our experience, if perhaps you're part of Wave 2, Wave 3. We know that Wave 2 is starting in November, and again, another group will be going through a similar experience to us, a group of local areas, in January. And so all of that information will then go together to form the national report. So please do ask us if we can help you in any way. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Saskia, and go back to you, because I know that I think you're facilitating some questions.
Great, yep. So we've got, firstly, thank you so much for sharing. That was really interesting and really useful, I'm sure. We've got sort of 15 to 20 minutes left of the session, so quite a lot of time for some questions first, and then it would be really good to hear what other areas are doing or are planning on doing. So I was wondering if anyone had any questions. One's come through already from Sally. I know you have touched on this a bit, but Sally wanted to know what criteria you adopted to choose your case studies. So I don't know if you could say a bit more about that.
Okay, well, we had a spreadsheet. We used our database. We knew we wanted to look at a multi-agency cases. We wanted those that really captured agencies working together. Also complexity of the case. We wanted to make sure that that there was the opportunity to describe the work from our practitioners right across the local area. So in terms of the EHCPs, we essentially picked those that were recent education, health and care plans, because Dorset had recently improved our plan, our EHCP template, and that had been totally co-produced with families, and we knew that they were better plans because our internal quality assurance processes had told us that, and so we decided to limit the sort of the pool of cases, if you like, to those that were more recent plans, but also really captured that multi-agency involvement. We knew also we wanted to, I think, Louise, I'm right in thinking we had some guidance in terms of the type of cases that we needed to
yes,
select.
they were quite clear that they just wanted that broad range of demographics, which included children who were known to a range of different agencies, children who were, maybe receiving services from, as due to child protection, care proceedings, looked after children, also, children who are transitioning into adult services, so, that whole transition planning. And so therefore, we were identifying a range of children based on that criteria. So each SEND manager was identifying, I think, 5 children each, and across that spectrum of demographics, and then we brought all of those children into a list, and then then we started QAing as well.
And we also ensured we had good age range, so we went right from, we had cases that were preschool, very early, very young, right through to the sort of post-16 and up to 25. So we made sure we had that broad cohort. And I think also, we chose 20 EHCPs, but we also chose 20 SEN support cases. So we went out to our schools, of course, and said, right, let's talk about which cases we can put forward here, and that was really nice, because actually we asked those, it was most usually the SENCO, but we asked the SENCO to just do a sort of a history, a description, because of course we don't hold as much centrally about those young people as we do for our EHCPs. So we were reliant on our partners within our schools and our settings. And that included our independent placements as well. So we went out to ISPs, we went out to our learning centres, and also we approached some schools, some settings that were independent but not special. So yeah, we went right across the piece, and then so those 20 and 20, 20 HCPs, 20 SEN support, that was what we put into the big spreadsheet, anonymised it, of course, and as soon as it was anonymised, off it went to the team, and then they made their selection. We did have 6 cases in the end rather than 4. We thought it would be 6, and we pretty much knew, Louise, didn't we, who they were going to choose.
It was interesting. It was interesting, just sort of, looking across the range, and you think, well, actually, if I was one of those people, if I was a visitor, I'd probably be interested in that young person. And, so, I was, well, we were all really clear that, there would be a young person who was, receiving services as a looked after child, a child who was subject to child protection planning, etc. But by providing that, that range that we did, then, they had choice in there. And I think that was really helpful for us to do that.
I think can I say something back?
Of course. Oh, sorry, I'm taking control now. Sorry.
It all sounds really comprehensive. I've made loads of notes. The reason why I'm specifically interested in this is because our Parent Carer Forum have expressed an interest. We don't enjoy as yet perhaps the same relationship that you do. It's improving, but it's not quite where I'd like it to be, but they have expressed a strong desire to submit some case studies of their own. They are where things will have gone royally wrong. They are where, and the focus, they say, being that you shouldn't just focus on positive stories, you should focus on where lessons need to be learnt. And God, I'm all about learning from lessons. But I wasn't too sure how prescriptive or the wording that came, because the spin that's been put on it or told to me is that they should be case studies, but certainly they were erring on more positive, a cross section for all those reasons that you've just set out there. And clearly I would have thought it would, if you know your stuff well enough, you'd be able to make an educated guess as to which 6 they're going to come back on, you know, which tick all boxes. I quite look forward to putting a bet on that, actually, to see what but I don't want to deny them the right, because I'm trying to build rapport. I want, you know, open and transparent, but I know they're coming with a very loaded gun, shall we say.
I wonder whether, just picking that up, because there is a bit about actually, okay, well, let's create a space for you, you know, so that absolutely you have that opportunity to talk about what is really important, what is that, you know, how that has been experienced, your experiences, and also, you know, I have to say our Parent Carer Council was so helpful, because the survey that comes through, I think we would all agree, could do better. And so, you know, and particularly for our young people, because there's a young person survey as well as an adult parent carers survey. And, you know, we absolutely had the conversation early on, and our Parent Carer Council was saying, blimey, really? And so really, you know, knowing that actually without their support, we would really struggle to get that engagement, because some of the questions weren't particularly well considered. And so, you know, we wanted to have the biggest, the widest response possible, because that's where we tell the story about all of our parents and all of our carers, and our young people's experience. So, you know, for our young people, absolutely having the conversations with schools and saying, please, can you do with, you know, this is the survey, please can you encourage as many of your young people as possible to complete this survey. Please, yeah, and as part of our comms plan, yeah, absolutely engaged with yeah, our carer council, because yeah, the messages that we wanted to send out absolutely had to be written by them, because you know, I know that I probably send out a message that, you know, was a little bit, I don't know, it just wouldn't hit the right mark. But actually crafting that, so our comms lead crafted those messages with our Dorset Parent Carer Council, so that you know, the reach of those messages was far and wide, because it was written by, written for. And I think, you know, creating those spaces and making sure that parent carers feel really involved in the process. And you know, and let me tell you, by no means were all of our 40 children, you know, did they have all these wonderful experiences. We absolutely showcased our challenges as well. And you know, just by the mere nature of having the time that we had, you know, we didn't have an industry or an army of people to kind of go, oh, hold on, not that one, that one, not that one, that one. You know, like Gerri said, I think there was probably about 4 or 5 of us, a very small team that was doing that. And we were kind of very much relying on actually, you know, is this going to really give us an opportunity to talk about children's experiences, families' experiences, of the pandemic, how that's impacted on them. So, you know, it was really important to have that variety. But I think absolutely engage at the earliest point and say, how do you want to be involved?
And in those case studies, we had we did pre-meets with the practitioners that had been working with the family. Really, just, you know, not drilling down into huge detail, but just that opportunity to share our experiences. So we focused on those 4 questions that we knew were a focus of the research. And there was a really interesting and animated conversation. And yes, those practitioners had been working together already and knew each other, but to have that opportunity to sit down and reflect on what they'd been through together through the period of the pandemic so far. I mean, it was. They said afterwards to us that they'd really welcomed that opportunity to have that chat together first before meeting with the inspector.
And I think also that film, so our executive director met with our members of the Dorset Parent Carer Council, or a number of those members, and some of the messages were quite, it was like, ouch, oh, we didn't do so well there, and that was free, and we put all of that in front of the inspectors, so so that they could see that, we weren't kind of trying to mould or shape, because actually this is about children and young people and their parents and carers. It's not about us. It's sort of, so I think having all of those opportunities is really helpful.
Thank you. Just finally, can I just ask the timescale on the survey, ladies? How long did you get to get that far and wide?
It was a week, I believe. So, yes. So, hold on, let me just think. That came in on the Monday. We had the setup call. And we had that, so it was just over, I think it was just over a week. It wasn't that long. And so what I would say to you is, as early as possible, have a communications plan, and design that with your parent carers, and engage with schools in readiness for that, doing alongside with young people, and then just, access that social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's whatever platform you have, just keep messaging that out as much as you can.
Is that an online survey? Is there capacity to do it in a paper format?
Well, you see, now this is also a challenge. I hope we've got all afternoon.
Sorry.
So no, it's really great, because of course, Dorset is the most beautiful county. I would say it's the most beautiful county in the country. However, it is challenged by Wi-Fi.
Yes.
So there are a range of places where Wi-Fi is very intermittent and non-existent, but also, to assume that all of our parents and carers have access to equipment that would facilitate, online surveys, etc. It just doesn't happen. No. And so that was one of the kind of pushbacks to our visitors, was around, well, actually, we've already described to you that virtual doesn't work for all of our parents and carers. And so therefore, can we think of other ways in which we can do this? It is an online survey. I don't think they were kind of prepared for that sort of pushback, in terms of, we were kind of saying, okay, so could we do paper then? But then, of course, the time frame is just not within our gift to kind of do that. And so really thinking outside about, okay, so, again, coming back to our Parent Carer Council and saying, actually, could you help us with this? Can you, come alongside? Can we find another way, so that we can really maximise our reach out to as many parents and carers as we can?
Thank you so much, ladies. Learned a lot. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Unfortunately, we've only got 5 minutes left of the session. That was really helpful, but just a couple of kind of quick fire questions, if that's okay. So one from David asking, how much notice did you receive about the visit?
I noticed that Vic's joined us. I don't know, Vic, if you want to take that one up while we have you.
Yeah, of
Welcome.
course.
Good to see you.
So it wasn't quite as fast as a normal inspection timetable, but we had about 5 days in terms of call from initial inspector to submitting documents. So to be honest, within Dorset, we ran this as a local area inspection timeframe. We ran it on a fast drumbeat. We were using that additional bit of time to reflect, not to prepare. And I think that was a really good use of that time.
Yeah, I've been talking about that, Vic, and just hammering that one home, that we did that from the start. Yeah.
And putting the child and young person at the centre. I'm sure we spoke a lot about that.
But
we often in an inspection kind of prepare the paper, submit, and then kind of phew, so it was I think there was some nice time there to spend with our practitioners and colleagues.
Great. And then a final question from Jane, which was about the case study template and how much information you chose to include.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. I mean, it was a challenge because we could have put so much in there, but actually it was really important that we didn't overwhelm the team with every single document we had around the young person. So in terms of the template, there wasn't a template that they provided. We did put a template together that was based very much on those questions that we talked about earlier in terms of the challenges, the opportunities, the what next, the experience for the young person. But we did put a template together with those questions, and we modified that. So in the end, when we came to submit our cases, it was all electronic. They were in folders. We had a sort of a case summary sheet that was a template that we were all very familiar with by then. And then we had some additional documents such as the risk assessment, of course, from COVID, but also information like some key reports and assessments that had happened. But we kept it very recent. We didn't go back, for example, and put all the documents in from, say, an EHCP or assessment. It was very much focused on giving a real sort of history around the young person in the light of what was happening to them during the pandemic.
Can I just add to that, Gerri? I think the one thing I would just share, though, is that we were very mindful that whilst there's complex backgrounds for some of our children, in particular the LAC cases and child protection cases, we didn't want to go back too far because they've come out of the pandemic quite differently, and that's what we were there to present. So our case summary is really focused in on the last 6 months, and I think Ofsted found that really helpful, and the CQC found that very helpful. And we'd be happy to share that template if colleagues find that useful.
Yeah.
Just drop us an email.
Saskia, I can see Darren's hand is up. I don't know whether you can see that.
Yeah, we've got, unfortunately, we don't really have any more time left in the session, unless your question is very, very quick, Darren.
My question was really in relation to health. Everything that's been discussed has been very other service focused, and it was really about how much focus they had on health services. Because everything that's been presented has been very, as we would expect.
No, absolutely. So our interaction with health, they were particularly interested in therapies and how those had started to move to virtual, and we were very honest about the fact that some of those worked very well, and for some children that just didn't work, and we needed alternative strategies. So health talked a lot about the future plans for using software like I think it's Attend Anywhere and WhatsApp, even as straightforward as WhatsApp as well. But there was some focus on things like the ASD pathway and how that had been delayed through the pandemic, and possibly the lines of inquiry that you might expect around delays in certain, both in therapy and also assessment. But Ofsted and CQC were very mindful of the experience of that and the impact on the NHS. So it wasn't a kind of probing line of inquiry. It was to gain an understanding of and what could we do better. So the parting message, I think, from colleagues in Ofsted and CQC was if we were in a second lockdown period, over Christmas or early next year, what did we learn that we would now do differently? And I think that's the one takeaway that I keep in the back of my mind of, if we are heading that way, how do we support those children, vulnerable children and young people, again, and better?
Don't redeploy 50% of your health staff to adult services. That's one way of doing it.
Thank you all so much. That was really, really helpful. All that's left is just to ask whether you'd be willing to share your slides with attendees. And willing for anyone to send any questions that they didn't have time to ask over to you, if that's okay.
And you've got our email addresses at the end of the slideshow, so please do get in touch. We're really happy to help you any way we can.
Great, thank you so much, everyone, and hopefully you should have received an invite to the second workshop, which is starting at 5:02, so just in a couple of minutes. And thank you so much again. That was a fantastic session.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. It was lovely being here.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.